Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Well-Rounded Saxophonist, a podcast that aims to provide valuable information to young saxophonists and music students in a digestible amount of time. I'm Owen Robinson, and today I will be interviewing Dr. Shawna Pennock, professor of saxophone at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Dr. Pennock, it's great to have you on the show today.
It's great to be here, Owen. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So my first question that I wanted to ask is, every artist has a different definition of success when it comes to their career. What would your definition of success be, and how would you suggest younger artists find their own definition of career success?
This is a tough question to tackle because the more years you are into your career, I think your definition changes. I mean, because once you achieve that goal, then you're successful, so then you have to set another goal. But I did want to discuss my very first definition of success when I first got out of school and needed to make money to live. We all had to go through it. You will have to go through it. And so my first definition of success was being able to live from jobs that included my saxophone. So jobs that I got because of my degrees or teaching the instrument. And so that was my first goal. That was my first definition. And it took a long time to get to that point. It started off as I had to take jobs that had nothing to do with music. And then I took a job that was not full-time. And so in order to devote a lot of time to that job, I had to cut my spending quite drastically. Actually, I rented a room from a family when I first got the job here in Las Vegas, and I think my rent was under $600, but that's what I could afford. And so I was able to set up that goal of providing for myself completely with my saxophone, even though it meant living very modestly. Now that I'm full-time, I have basic living covered, and I can kind of tweak my definition. So now my definition of success is being able to set boundaries and saying no to certain things so I can focus on what I'm truly passionate about. The pieces, the projects, the recordings, the interviews that I really think are important. So I think right now I'm focusing on, am I passionate about this? And if something comes into me, I'm able to say no to the things I'm not passionate about. But that comes from a place of privilege. I have a job that does provide for me. So it definitely changes. But at the moment, that is my definition of success, is those boundaries and being really passionate about the projects I do.
That's a great answer. Yeah, I think that it's definitely a luxury that musicians are able to say no to certain things. You know, obviously everyone has something or certain things that they want to work on, and financial stability, job security, all of that kind of allows more freedom. Like, I know right now there are certain things, especially as a student, like there are certain pieces, projects, auditions that I don't necessarily want to do, but right now, you know, that's the option. And the goal would later be able to kind of pick and choose more what I get to work on, what I want to work on.
Right. And I should clarify, I'm not even 100% there yet. I still take on jobs or gigs that maybe I'm not 100% passionate about. It's, you know, I'll get some 20 to 30% gratification just playing chamber music or something like that. But it is, you know, sometimes I still have to take jobs that means a good paycheck at the end of the week or at the end of the month. But for young students or for people just starting their careers, I mean, obviously, you got to provide for yourself. You gotta pay to eat, and you got to pay for somewhere to live. I think the other thing, once you have that covered, is really tuning into yourself. When an opportunity comes up, are you excited about it? Or are you kind of dreading that? I think that is a really good way to just kind of put on a scale. Am I excited about this? Am I really passionate about it? Because I think a lot of people will just kind of go through the motions and take absolutely everything they can. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think you can burn yourself out and keep yourself from really experiencing those things that you truly, truly love doing or would develop that love for. So I think listening inward to how you really react to those opportunities that come up is very important when you're young.
Yeah, for sure. The next question that I wanted to ask was, when planning for a recital, what kinds of things do you consider when programming repertoire?
So going off of that, listening to yourself that I just said, I asked myself, does this piece speak to me? Am I excited to play it? Is there something about it I want to learn? Is there something about it that will help me grow? And then I also ask myself, will this piece speak to the audience? Will they find it entertaining? Will they learn something from it? I think if you don't have those two things, like if you can't say yes to both of those things, then you should reconsider what you're programming. Otherwise, if you're performing it just for yourself, then it can seem kind of hollow, but also you may not have any audience engagement. And without an audience, what are we doing? We don't have jobs without an audience.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting, perspective. It's like, as performers, I think we get so wrapped up in the creative process and in the music itself just because we love it. And of course, we might even practice pieces we're not necessarily going to perform, but
All the time.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely, just because, we want to. But it is interesting to think, if I'm going to be playing for people, what do I want to present to them? What do I want them to hear me play?
Right. And then you get to this conversation of, do I want to bring something completely new to the audience to experience? Because that's important too. We can't just play the good old classics and then have, everyone be happy. So it's like this conversation then begins of, what is my role as the performer? Am I somewhat of an educator, or am I just there to create an experience? What is our responsibility as the artist with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, you bring up playing classic repertoire pieces that people know. And, while that has a time and a place, it's like, for instance, I love the Glazunov concerto. It's
Who
definitely,
doesn't?
yeah, it's a gorgeous piece. It's a beautiful piece of music. But, at this point, I don't know that I would choose to perform it in the coming years, just because I've played it so many times, I've studied it so much, and it's time to kind of explore new things. And chances are, if I play a recital, a bulk of the audience will be saxophonists, since I'm a student. So it's like they, have heard that piece. They maybe have even heard me play it. So it's time to go, go do something else. Are there any particular composers that you've played, newer composers that you've played music by recently?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask this as like a follow-up, because I always, the names always go from my brain. But yes, I have some favorites. I really like the music of Jennifer Beller. She's a good friend of mine, and we've collaborated many times. She writes for the saxophone just beautifully, and she has this very ethereal quality to her music that it's a very unique perspective. So I love her music, and she's constantly putting out albums, so check her out. Then I'm also working on some transcriptions of Viet Quang pieces. I really love his writing, and there's something about his transitions when he's moving in and out of sentences in his pieces that just really captivates me, and so I've been exploring that. I played the Shelley Washington 2 baritone piece. The name is escaping my mind at the moment, but I love that, and also great messaging in it. Can you think of the title of the piece? What is that?
I remember when it came out, but I don't
Big
know
Talk.
the title. Oh,
Big
yeah,
Talk,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Okay. That
Yes.
sounds right.
Yes. So many conversations came from playing that piece, and I'm sure a lot of the audience will know the piece, but it's the piece 2 baritones, and you wear the T-shirt with all the writing, or people actually write on their bodies things that have been said to them. So catcalls, or like just terrible things. And I remember creating my own T-shirt with those things on it, and people asked me after the performance, like, "Oh, that's been said to me too," or people would question it. A lot of like, was that really said to you? And I went, yes, absolutely. It's actually been said twice, you know? So I really love music that has a message to it. And so when composers are actively engaging in that in their art, I really respect it and explore it as much as possible.
Absolutely. And this is really interesting because classical saxophone is so niche and community based that what better of a message to bring up than the message that this piece brings up, and that segues perfectly, I think, into my next question, which is the saxophone world has been traditionally male dominated, but this demographic is quickly changing. Do you have any suggestions for young female identifying saxophonists who are forging a career in music?
I have a lot of things. I've been thinking about this, forever, right? Because I do identify as a woman. But I have a question for you before I answer this. Can you tell me what have you seen or what have you heard from your mentors that suggests this demographic is changing? I'm just curious.
I suppose it's not necessarily coming from any source or any particular mentor, but personally, I have seen more and more, I guess, female students playing the saxophone, and it seems like I'm currently at Interlochen, and I was actually I'm working as an artist in residence with Interlochen Public Radio, and
Right.
I've noticed at the Saxophone Institute and just in camp in general, like young female identifying saxophonists more than I would expect. For whatever reason, it was like when I started playing the saxophone, it's like almost completely male, maybe one or two female identifying players, say in middle school or in high school.
Okay.
And like historically, it's like all these big names in the classical world, especially like Marcel Muhl, Sigurd Roscher, Donald Sinta, Larry Teal, all these, male names. And especially, I think, in jazz saxophone as well. It's like just name, throughout the 20th century, there were very few successful or large, big name female saxophonists. And now you have female saxophonists like Alexa Tarantino, Melissa Aldana, these big names who are at the forefront of jazz saxophone, like this completely, or at least from my perspective, my limited perspective as a listener, a male dominated profession. So it just appears to me that it's changing. Like, women who have gained enough respect in the profession to play at a super high level. And, I think that there's obviously a long way to go. But for me, I feel like we're on a trajectory where it could be an instrument for everybody.
Okay. I think you're right. And I just wanted to ask like how you were seeing it, because I obviously see it from a different point of view. And I do agree. I think you're right. And I was wondering if you had this thought because I have felt the conversation about being a woman in saxophone has gotten louder in the last few years. And that may be biased because it's in the last few years I've become a professional saxophonist. But we can see from the formation of the Committee for the Status of Women within NASA that the conversation has been brought out. And it makes me very hopeful that these groups have formed, that group has formed, and they're doing work to promote women, and it's all really great. And I've done my own kind of work with my own Instagram account, my small Instagram account with tell me a story about being a woman in saxophone. And I guess why I wanted to ask you that was because I had a lot of people, a lot of women that have been professionals for a long time who wrote in and said, oh, this has been happening forever. These situations, these microaggressions. And I even remember seeing a post on Facebook that a woman saxophonist had written saying, oh, I've been having this conversation for decades. I can't talk about it anymore. It's too frustrating. And so these issues, these problems have been happening for so long. And so I have this like thought in my mind. And I guess it's kind of a sad thought of like, has this really been going on for so long? And like it hasn't changed too much. Like, so then it makes me worry that all this work that I'm trying to do and this advocacy is all for nothing, but it gives me hope that you see it is growing. There are more women in the professional field, and so that's great. Okay, so now to answer your question, what would you recommend, or what would you tell young women entering the musical field? And let's see, my first thing. So practice protecting your space. And I'll give you a little story about this. I was walking my dog in Las Vegas, and Las Vegas drivers are notoriously a little crazy. They go sideways very fast without a turn signal, and and very, very fast drivers too. So I was walking my dog, and I was about to cross the street, and I see a car coming at me, and so they're coming at me from the left, and I can see that they're going to try and turn right. So I'm about to walk right in front of them. So my dog and I walk right in front. We're in the crosswalk, and this car does not slow down very much and just starts to turn the corner without stopping at all. Very close to me, and I had what must have been like just a little snap, and I took my left foot and I back kicked that car as hard as possible, just like hey, you're in my space and this is not okay. And that car sped off so fast, and my heart was pumping. I was like, oh my gosh, what if they turn around? What if they come after me? But that one instance sparked 3 weeks of me just really being pumped about like keeping my space physically and mentally, just not letting things enter my sphere that I didn't want. And that was very empowering. And so I think it's really important for young female identifying musicians to practice protecting their space physically, because that will cross over to their mental space. And I think it's very important to not let stupid things enter your sphere, whether it be people saying mean things or derogatory things to you. Protect your space physically and mentally, and practice doing it, because that's the only way you'll get better at it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is something that I've been practicing recently myself, is do not ask to speak. Make your thought a hard arrival. And this is something maybe there is a term for this, but I have noticed in my own speech patterns, when I'm in a group of people, I will put out some sort of little introductory, can I speak, like group of words, like, well, you know, this sort of, and then I get interrupted immediately right there. I didn't say anything important. I was saying words to kind of connect to my thought. And so over the past month, when I'm in a group of people, I've been practicing hard arrival, whatever the topic is. Oh, I had this experience where this happened to me. And now it's the ball's in my court to keep speaking. So I've been taking it upon myself to not let myself get interrupted. And I think this could be a very valuable thing for women, to just don't ask to speak, just do it. Just say it and put it out there. And that takes practice as well. And this next tip could actually go for anyone. If you find yourself too scared to speak in front of a large group of people, record yourself speaking for 10 minutes and listen to that before you go into a meeting or into a large group of people. Could be going into your saxophone studio meetings. I accidentally stumbled on this. I was listening to an interview I did, just kind of checking, making sure everything was good before they posted it. And it was an hour-long interview. And then I went into a faculty meeting, and I kid you not, my hand went up for every question. I had an opinion about everything, and that didn't always happen. I was just ready. I was ready to speak. I was like, my opinion matters. I'm here. Hello. And that was just, I was so used to hearing my voice talking that my brain was just ready to hear more. So I have a couple of more. Do you mind if I keep sharing?
No, not at all. Please continue.
Great. Okay. So the third thing, find other women in music and talk with them. It's so great to have a supportive group of people. Number one, to just confirm that you're not crazy, that these things are not only happening to you. And by these things, I mean microaggressions or, being told that your dress was great when you just gave a big performance and that was it. It's really good to have confirmation from other women, and also to just talk about things you're unsure about. And that leads to the other thing that I would suggest. If you feel like a situation is weird, like something's happened, someone said something to you, and you're not sure why it's wrong or why you feel this way, it just feels off, trust yourself that it is off and go talk to someone about it, because what that means is you just don't have the language to describe why that situation was wrong or why that was unfair. I find that a lot of young women don't have the language to describe what's happened to them, and that what the microaggression was, or how the situation wronged them. And once they learn the language, they are able to protect themselves better and communicate to other people why the situation is not okay and how it should change. Find teachers you truly connect with. I attribute my success to that. I had mentors that I really believed in their musicianship, and I was able to talk with them about the music very easily. I understood what they were trying to tell me. And I think that's very important to be successful in this field, is having mentors that support you, and then also having mentors that you kind of click on a language level. You understand each other. Find what you're passionate about and be unabashedly excited about it. That is the most exciting thing to see in people. And I think if you find that, you will feel authentic and you will do your best work. And then just to close that off, what I want to say is none of those things have anything to do with playing the saxophone, playing faster, playing higher, playing certain pieces. Women can play the saxophone. That's not the problem. The problem are the other things. So that would be my advice.
That's great. Those are all incredible answers. And I wanted to ask that question partially because, of the posts you've made on Instagram that have been very eye-opening for me personally. And the like you said, NASA has started the conversation about how female saxophonists are treated and seen in the field, and there's also like the Women in Jazz organization, and I think it's just a super important conversation to have. You actually mentioned the two baritone piece that remind me of the name. That was
Big Talk
by composer
Shelley Washington.
Yes, that I remember when that piece came out. And I remember all of the things that were drawn on the T-shirts. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't necessarily shocked, but I was appalled by it. And it just really made me think about my place in the saxophone world as a man, the kind of things I wouldn't have to worry about somebody saying to me, things that, I don't have to worry about. I can just focus on the music, my love for the saxophone. And I think everyone should be able to. But it's interesting to think that there are social barriers for others that I don't have, right, that may affect I brought up career success. It might affect their career success. It might affect their, ability to play what they want. It might, I just thought it would be a very, kind of eye-opening question to discuss.
Absolutely. And what you just said about the barriers that exist. Even something as simple as in a studio, and I've seen this in a few studios, like I've been to a couple studio classes, and I see a group of men talking, and it's not about saxophone. It's actually, sometimes feels like bro talk. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's a conversation that women may not want to enter or have to enter. And the women that do have to take on that bro persona. And I'm not calling anyone out here because it happens naturally. It's how we bond with other humans. We communicate the same way. But that culture can be very isolating for women in a studio when they see that, a group of 9 men in the corner of the studio just kind of talking about, they could be talking about anything. Sure, sports, going to the gym and bulking up, games.
Yes, exactly. Right.
The woodshed.
Stereotypical male. Yes, exactly.
Yes, and so I would encourage all men in studios where there are more men than women, and I think that's the majority of studios. I'm definitely I don't think I'm wrong about the majority. There are studios where there are more women, but I would
I would say
encourage.
your typical saxophone studio is probably majority male. I mean, every
Yes.
instrument sort of has their percentage of male identifying to female identifying, etc.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And saxophone, I was probably male heavy, but
absolutely. So I think it's important for men to look around when social events are happening and just see where is everyone physically, who is participating in this conversation. I think that's very important, but it is tough because, and this is just like a psychological fact. When you are not experiencing the microaggression or you're not experiencing the hardships or the isolation, it's very difficult for you to see it. It's the tailwinds, headwinds effect. When you're riding your bike into the wind, you feel it, but if you're riding it the other way, you barely notice there's a wind. So it's really important I think it's really important for men to turn the other way and try and like experience or ask people, what does this headwind feel like for you? Because I don't know.
yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting too, because I think that would be a good challenge for any man, myself included, to really think about the conversation I'm having right now. Who out of the people who are in the room would find this interesting or engaging? Who
Right.
would feel like they can participate in this conversation? You know, I'm not a huge sports person, but if there's like a group of male saxophonists talking about football stats, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a group of female saxophonists who are not interested in that, not that they can't be, but they aren't, how could said group of saxophonists kind of think about and change their pattern of conversation so that everyone in the room can have a conversation together?
Right. And I think it is very intimidating as a woman in a studio that is mostly men to walk into that circle and insert themselves and try to engage authentically, or even bring what they're interested in. And that's the hard part. Like, how can you pull out what they're truly interested in when they feel like they are minority and like could just be ostracized for what they're bringing up? So I think part of the responsibility is on the men to engage with the women and figure out what they're interested in. And I'm not saying you have to turn your whole speech upside down and you have to throw everything you've been talking about out. My boyfriend talks about the Minnesota Vikings all the time. Do I love it? No, but I will talk about it sometimes. But he finds things that I like talking about. So it goes both ways. I think the word we're looking for is micro affirmations. So as opposed to the microaggressions, right? Small ways that show that the women are included, are important, are valuable in the studio. I think that's what we have to figure out how to do, is make them feel that way.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, after all, it's about art. It's about music. It's not about who identifies as what. It's about, you know, we're trying to do something awesome together. So this I think conversation is one that everyone should at least have or think about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So my next question is, from a teacher's perspective, how do you strike the balance between encouragement and criticism while helping students reach their full potential as an artist?
This is a great question. And I think a lot of teachers, if they're honest with themselves, struggle with this when they first begin teaching. When I was a TA, I was not very good at being clear with my students about what their struggles were. I had the belief of you build them up, and eventually they'll figure it out, right? I was so overly positive. And now I am of the belief of clarity is caring. So I'm very clear with the student now about what they've done well, what they're struggling with, and what they need to fix. Because going back to where I was when I was a beginning teacher, just overly positive and enthusiastic, probably to a sickening level. But I didn't want to make a student feel bad. That was like my worst fear as a young teacher. And I had a student get visibly upset because she knew that what she did not sound good. What she had just played wasn't trash, but it wasn't great. And she wanted to be better. And I was like, no, this was good, and this was good, and this was good. And we had a meeting where that just wasn't working, and it was a huge eye opener for me. So I believe the balance is you need to be clear at all times where they are struggling and where they are thriving. And you need to be very clear about what that struggle, should it continue, means. So like you can't the last week of a semester go, if you don't fix this, you're going to fail. That's a bad teacher. You need to be very clear about when that struggle begins and go, if you continue to do this semester, your grade will be affected in this way. Here's what we need to do to fix it, or here's when it needs to be fixed. Clarity is key in being a good teacher. I think that's the big thing. I, of course, believe in helping students through any struggle and meeting them where they are. That's the biggest thing. All my students come to me at a different level. So meeting them where they are and then building them up from there. And then the other thing is the goal is always the same, but the way there is different for every student, right? Just because I did a certain thing in my 3 degrees doesn't mean that that's the same path for another student. Could be a completely different path to get to the same goal. So I think it's helping each student find their own path.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. And I've talked with other professors about this, and every student, I think, has a different tolerance for criticism and like the ratio of criticism to, encouragement or praise. And that's interesting that you brought up, some teachers I've talked to start out, they felt they were too harsh when they started. And
Sure.
some students, like I was talking to Dr. Robert Young, and he said actually he kind of found that students would shut down if you were overly critical and didn't have as much encouragement in the mix.
Yes.
And I find it interesting that you kind of started on the other end of the spectrum where you were very encouraging and you had a particular student who actually wanted more of that criticism. It has to feel almost like a responsibility as a teacher. Like, what am I doing to, like you said, build a student from their current level, get from point A to point B. And that particular student wanted to know how she could make this thing better. And she knew like, oh, this doesn't sound good. This doesn't sound right. I wanted to, but I don't know how to get there. And
Right.
what she did, she actually didn't want to hear, this sounds great. She wanted to hear, yeah, this needs some work. Here's how you can, that's really interesting to me.
Right. And, the crazy thing to me looking back on it was what needed to change in my approach was my ability to shield myself from feeling their emotions. I'm a very empathetic person. If someone cries, I immediately don't want them to cry, and I try and do whatever I can possible to get them to stop crying. But that stopped me from being clear and really pointing out this particular student's struggles and what needed to change. And so I had to become stronger in not letting myself fall into that emotional kind of hole with the student if they got emotional, because music's very personal. When you criticize someone's playing, it can feel very personal sometimes. But I had to develop a thicker skin for not letting the student's emotions affect my emotions. And now I can look at a student struggling and go, oh my gosh, look at this learning that's happening right now. This is so beautiful. And I think that's a healthy place to be as a teacher. You can identify them struggling, point it out, and still recognize, ooh, this could yield good results.
That's an awesome answer.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is a big interest of mine. My dad was an English professor for a long time. He's since moved to administration, but I've always been around teachers. Teachers have been some of the most influential people in my life. I studied with Joe Luloff at Michigan State. He's, been a profound influence on me. My saxophone teacher in high school, Shannon Ford, like she was my favorite teacher that I had in high school. Just like really, really opened my eyes that music is a viable career path, and she helped get me organized, helped me learn how to prepare for auditions, etc. So yeah, it's just so cool to hear, teachers' perspectives on these things.
Yeah, definitely.
Now I have some non-music questions, which I really love hearing about these. what do you like to do outside of music?
So this summer, I've gotten really into disc golf. My boyfriend loves disc golf. He would get up at 7 a.m. and just, hey, I'm leaving, and just take off and go play some holes before it gets to be 110 degrees here in Vegas. So this summer, I got a really great beginner set of discs specifically for women. So lighter discs from Innova. I got like some lighter Leopards, Wombat 3s. What else? I got a really great putter that's it's lighter, so I can throw it a little farther right now. But last night I was out at the night course. We have a course that's all lit up with lights, so you can play until like 9:30. And I was just throwing my Leopard. I was just doing drives, just trying to get it, to do its correct path. And so I'm very obsessed with it because it's all about technique. If you throw the disc and it's hyzer, that's going to affect the flight pattern. So for non-disc golf people, hyzer is like it's tilted down, so then it kind of goes off at an angle and stays at that angle. But certain discs will like flip over. And so I find it fascinating that pieces of plastic have different flight patterns, and I'm learning all these flight patterns right now. So that's what I've been very obsessed with this summer.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really interesting to me too, that it's like technique focused, and so you're kind of drawn to that for that reason. Like, wow, go figure, a musician is interested in something that's technique based.
There's been a couple of times where my throws, I've been doing the equivalent of like a golf slice, I guess. It just like hasn't gone like out straight, it goes up and just dives. And, my friends will be like, oh, well, you're doing this and you're like throwing it too hyzer. And I'm like, can you just tell me how to not throw it high? Like, what am I doing wrong that makes that happen? And like, I'm looking for, the DMA level disc golf answers anytime that I'm playing. And I think I've had to just kind of relax, and it's just been like exploring like what works for me. And it's going to be a long journey to get to that level of, technique and just knowing exactly how to release.
Yeah, I love things like that. My father is really interested in like learning through hobbies. Conveniently for me, his hobby right now is audio recording, specifically classical saxophone. Like he's obsessed with audio equipment and recording, and that really helps me out. My hobby is I love to fish. And for me, it's like all kinds of like equipment, lures, time of day, location. There's so much that goes into it, and I love like detail-oriented, equipment-oriented, technique-oriented things.
I have a question for you. Have you found anything in your fishing learning studies that you have been able to parallel to saxophone?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, honestly, thinking about it right now, I would say being efficient is a good thing, and it can make things more fun. Like, I wouldn't go out in the middle of the day when it's super hot and fish from a dock because the chances of catching things are lower. The fish get warm and they go to deeper water. And, I would fish probably at night, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock for an hour or two. And, I think I've kind of applied that to practice. Like, you don't want to be in there forever, sweating and being frustrated. You want to go into the practice room. What do I have to do to get this done and be successful? Really pick out. And I wouldn't just fish in a random spot or in shallow water somewhere I knew I wasn't going to catch fish. I'd go to the edge of a dock or find a drop off. I'm not just going to blindly play through a piece of music now. I'm going to go, which section in this quartet piece or this solo piece is really difficult, and play it slowly, be patient with it. That for sure. I think it's like helped with patience, strategizing, etc.
I love that. It definitely just solidifies my thought of, to be a good musician, you have to go out into the world and live it. So just being in a practice room all day, it's going to get you somewhere in the music, but I don't know, fishing might get you further.
Right, exactly. And so I have another question. It's kind of similar, but how do you stay healthy while leading the busy lifestyle of a musician?
It's a constant struggle. Constant struggle. I'm sure you agree. And I can't wait to listen to all your episodes and hear what the other people say. Because if someone has figured it out, and I feel like a few might have figured it out. I see some posts of people doing some epic health things. But some things I do, I try and get extra sleep when it's a stressful season. I remember I had a boss one time who said, everyone, it's a busy time of year. Just try and go to bed an hour earlier. I'm like, wow, what a great idea. None of us think about that. When it gets to be that stress time of the semester, we're staying up later. We're doing more work. We're not actually giving ourselves more rest. And I think trying to prioritize rest is very important. Eating right, super important. I mean, all that food affects our mood, especially. If I'm going to, if I crush a whole pizza, which if the situation's correct, I haven't eaten a lot in a while, probably could. I'm not going to want to practice right after that. You have to constantly be thinking about how you're treating your body because we are athletes. We are. You can't tell me we're not, especially you go into a practice room, you're running scales, and all of a sudden your hand feels a little stiff and your elbow's stiff. What would an athlete tell you to do? What would a trainer do? You got to rest it. You can't just keep throwing the ball. Or you can't just keep kicking the soccer ball. You got to rest it or take a break. So it's very important to stay healthy. I think getting adequate sleep, but also putting up some boundaries as well. Maybe not going out for that, dinner after work and putting yourself in a social situation that you have to put out a lot of mental effort or emotional effort. Listening to your body, taking that rest, saying no to things, I think is very important to maintaining your mental and physical health.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I don't know if this is just luck, but sometimes I feel like I do those things automatically. Like if I have a performance coming up or I've had a performance and I'm tired, I might not go to said dinner or social thing. When I've noticed when I'm stressed, I think I honestly sleep just as much or maybe a little more, which is kind of weird, but I can't stay up late. I'm one of those people, even if I had an essay to write, like if I were getting super, super tired and it's like getting late, 12 a.m., I'd be like, nope, I have to put this down. I have to put this down and do it later.
Oh, and I think you were born a 30-year-old.
I feel like that sometimes. I think it might. I mean, I'm 21 years old and I'm doing a podcast on classical saxophone pedagogy, and I don't even have a bachelor's degree yet. So maybe I was born 30.
You're an old soul. That's when I turned 30, that's what I felt. The all-nighter was out. Never again. Cannot. Even, I am sure other people over 30 who listen to this will feel this. Even if I were to have like a chicken sandwich at 10 p.m., I feel it the next morning. It's like, did I even sleep? What just happened to me? So yeah, I am impressed that you have a good sleep routine at a young age. I know a lot of students who practically don't sleep. So yeah,
I would personally just shut down. It doesn't work. If I don't get enough sleep and then I say work a shift at work or do an intense practice session, like I will need a nap. I will pass out. I will fall asleep.
Yeah. When I get super stressed out, my tell is that I've stopped cleaning my car. It just, Gatorade bottles, coffee cups, food packaging is in there. And it never gets to a point where it smells ripe. It's just, for that 2 weeks leading up to a recital, it's like, oh, I have 6 mugs in here and maybe a plate because I heated something up and ran to my car with the food. So that's kind of a tell for me. I can go, oh, I'm kind of pushing it here. Let's clean this up and let's kind of re-strategize.
That's great. I think everyone probably has some kind of tell of like, yeah. I've been stressed.
Yes.
Dr. Pennock, this was awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks again for having me and for sharing all this wonderful information with people.
Thank you for listening. This concludes episode 7 of The Well-Rounded Saxophonist, featuring special guest Dr. Shawna Pennock, professor of saxophone at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. The music you heard in this episode was composed by Dorothy Chang, performed by Zachary Costello, alto saxophone, and Guillaume Ra, piano. I'm Owen Robinson, and this has been The Well-Rounded Saxophonist. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember to practice smart and stay healthy.